What if I told you that I'm the girl from the revolting children dance gone viral? You'd say, and you're 30, that's impossible. My mummy says I'm Anne van der Welst. Guys, welcome back to another unnecessarily detailed comparison where I compare films to its musical adaptations. This is already the third installment. I've already done Mean Girls and Heathers. Don't know what I'm pointing at because it will clearly be here. Or even here. I don't actually. How does that work? I don't know. But this week's subject is Matilda! We're gonna look at the 1996 film versus a 2011 musical versus a 2022 movie musical. Now hold your horses, and by that I mean your fingers. Do not rush down to the comment section below to tell me that it is actually based on a book by Roald Dahl, because I already know that. I've simply chosen not to include it in this comparison because I don't have time, and because I can't read. We are going to investigate every difference between these three versions and then allocate a point to the strongest choice. At the end of the video, we add up all the points and find out which Matilda is the miracle. Now, last time I compared three versions, people were quite quick to point out that it wasn't really fair that I was giving the musicals points for their songs, seeing the original film didn't even have that song in the first place. So in an attempt to even out the playing field, I will not give points for the music. Because let's be honest, Tim Minchin is a genius, and so I'd have to give a point for almost every song. From the ingenuity of the school song to the sentimentality of When I Grow Up, the perfect characterization of Quiet, the message of Naughty. I absolutely love the soundtrack of Matilda the Musical, and I'm so happy it had a new life as a movie musical to reach the people who might not have had the opportunity to go watch the stage version. Although the soundtrack for the original Matilda film is also quite the vibe. Perfect playlist for when you're making pancakes. But so from now onwards, I will not talk about the music anymore. But can I just quickly list which songs didn't make it to the movie musical soundtrack? Because otherwise I feel like I wasn't thorough enough, and honestly it's kind of triggering for me. So, The Reprise of Miracle, Pathetic, Loud, Telly, and then they added Still Holding My Hand. Wow. Racers, Start Your Engines, and may the best Magitum win! We're kicking off with geography. What the fuck is on this end of my sock? Is that my foot? Oh, it's my size. It's my size of my sock. I thought my foot was coming through. Anyway, this is hurting my hip. She's old. We're kicking off with geography. The 1996 film is the only version that is set in the United States. All the other versions, including the book, were set in the UK. Which makes me wonder, when Matilda was playing on Broadway, was everyone speaking with a British accent? Nothing in the story is particularly tied to a certain location, so I understand that producer Danny DeVito was like, it'll be easier to film it all here, and also I want to be in it and I don't want to learn Cockney. This change doesn't really affect the story in any way, so I won't be handing out any points at this point. Just thought it was interesting to point out. Okay. The 1996 film starts with a cute monologue about how unique every person is. The musicals transformed this into the opening number Miracle, which is where we encounter our second difference. Mrs. Wormwood, Mama Matilda, is no longer a bingo fanatic, but a ballroom dancer. This makes sense for the musical theater genre, to add a dance element, but the writers actually also used it to raise the stakes / give Mrs. Wormwood a more well-rounded character. Let me explain. In the movie, the first time we see Mrs. Wormwood, she's already postpartum and complaining. In the musical, we meet Mrs. Wormwood in the hospital refusing to believe that she's pregnant and about to give birth. Now, instead of giving her the she's just a dumb blonde treatment, the writers added the element of a ballroom competition that she desperately wants to compete in, explaining that she probably did know on some level that she was pregnant, but was so driven to compete that she convinced herself that she wasn't. So she's not dumb, she's just delusional, which is better. I like that the writers took the element of the ballroom, which was definitely added just to have a built-in dance number, and used it to improve the story. So first points of the day go to the musicals. In the 2022 film, we meet Mrs. Phelps very early in the story. The librarian only had a tiny part in the original film, but the stage adaptation decided to make Mrs. Phelps a little sidekick for Matilda. In the stage musical, we meet her in the library, about 20 minutes into the musical. In the 2022 film, we meet her straight away as Matilda is chilling on top of her library caravan at the end of the song Miracle. Okay, so if we're being pedantic, which I guess we are, seeing the title is unnecessarily detailed, Mrs. Phelps now has a library caravan instead of just working in a library building. But I honestly don't know why they added this, and I don't have any particularly strong feelings for or against it, so I'm just gonna leave it and we're just gonna focus again on our original point, which was, when do we meet Mrs. Phelps? By encountering her this early in the story, the audience sees Matilda lie about her home situation straight away. Whereas in the stage musical, we see her horrible home life first, and then we see her lie about it, which I think makes way more sense. In the movie musical, we now have Matilda singing about how horrible her parents are in her miracle epilogue, followed straight away by her lying about it to Mrs. Phelps. And then the next scene we see for ourselves how horrible her parents are. I don't know if we needed this back and forth this early on in the story. I think the stage adaptation has a smoother build-up, so point for the stage. Next up is the brutal murder of Michael Wormwood. Who is Michael Wormwood? I'm glad you asked. Michael Wormwood is Matilda's brother, who in the film bullies her a bit. In the stage adaptation is completely dumbed down to the point where I felt a bit uncomfortable to laugh with him, if I'm honest, and who got cut out of the movie musical. His part was of no real significance to the plot, and so the movie musical writers decided to bin him. Better yet, they decided to make his non-existence of significance to the plot. If the Wormwoods already have a kid, having another one doesn't feel as quite as big of an inconvenience. Plus, in the musical Daddy Wormwood. Do you think there's such a thing as like Matilda-themed porn? Daddy, your worm is as hard as wood. Okay, and focus. In the musical, Mr. Wormwood calls Matilda son, highlighting yet again that she's an unwanted child. But sorry, Michael, I think you're the unwanted child. Point for the movie musical. In the original film, there's a little moment foreshadowing the swap of the hair products, which I thought was a nice touch. In the musicals, Matilda also puts her mom's hair dye in her dad's hair oil during the song Naughty, but that's the first time we see the products. I like that the film shows us the moment inspiration struck. So point for the OG. A huge difference between the 1996 film and the musicals is the plotline of the flaming escapologist and the acrobat. I vividly remember watching the stage show and thinking, oh, this must be something from the book that they have reintroduced, but apparently this plotline is original to the stage musical, which I'm almost afraid to say because I know I'm going to get so much hate, but I don't know if we actually need it. All right, settle down. I do appreciate that it is Matilda's way of handling her traumatic upbringing, and I definitely also enjoy how it links back to Miss Honey, but I thought it was a very complicated side story, okay? I don't know if it is because English isn't my first language, but the word escapologist really confused me. Maybe I'm just a bit dim. I don't know. I do really like the concept, but I just don't really like the execution, I think. I think if it was a simpler, maybe shorter story, it would have been more effective. So I'm gonna give the point to the original. Oh my god, stop hating me. Stop it now. Miss Honey gets introduced at different points in each version. In the 1996 film, we meet her on the first day of school. In the stage adaptation, she makes a fleeting appearance in the library, and in the movie musical, she and a school inspector come to Matilda's house. Now, I understand that due to the whole Escapologist and Acrobat saga, it is important that we meet Miss Honey a bit earlier in the story, so that Matilda can be inspired by her. I personally think meeting her in the library, Matilda's safe space, is lovely because it shows yet again that Matilda and Miss Honey are kindred spirits. So point for the stage adaptation. In the original film, we see way more behind the scenes of Mr. Wormwood's business. He even takes the kids to his workplace to show them around. This is where we get the super gluing of the hat gag. In the musicals, this moment happens after Matilda rips up her library book and she wants to glue it back together. We still get that Mr. Wormwood is a fraudulent car salesman through exposition in the musicals, but the writers decided to trim that plot line down to the essential. Probably to make space to focus on Matilda's coping mechanism, aka the storytelling, aka the escapologist. Now this car scene in the film, followed by the restaurant scene, followed by the TV scene, is a slow build-up for Matilda to develop her magical powers. So I understand why it was part of the film. My bet is that Danny DeVito kept those scenes in because he wanted to act those scenes. Which, hey, no judgment here. I've written and produced my own play, and guess which character was the only one singing? That's right. Me. So I totally get that if you're the one running the ship, you want to have a nice part, especially if it's included in the original source material. But I think in the grand scheme of things, these scenes don't really serve the message of the film that much. So I'm gonna give the points to the musicals. On the topic of Mr. Wormwood, in the original film he gets trailed by the FBI who pretend to be speedboat salesmen. There's even a scene where Matilda confronts them and steals their tape. Seeing the original is the only version set in America, the FBI gets replaced with the Russian maffia in the musicals. Why the Russian maffia, you ask? When surely stereotypically, the mafia is Italian? Girl, I don't know. Well, the only reason I could think of is because da means yes in Russian. So when he says Matilda, the others think he's saying yes, and then there's a joke. Wow. It does make more sense for them not to be part of national security because they could obviously just track the Wormwoods when they're fleeing by plane. So, reluctantly, point for the musicals. Matilda is a very clever girl, but besides the reading from an early age, each version has its own way of showing that. In the 1996 film, we get a scene where Matilda's dad asks her brother to calculate his profit, and Matilda calculates it all in her head. In the stage musical, Miss Honey asks Matilda to say the 2 times table. She keeps going until Miss Honey stops her. This is a variation of a similar scene in the OG film. In the movie musical, Miss Honey asks Matilda to polish off the board, seeing there's still some maths from the evening school scribbled on. Matilda misunderstands and actually solves the equation instead of wiping down the board. I like that Matilda in the stage adaptation almost discovers herself in that moment that she actually doesn't know what the limits of her mind are, as she says she probably could keep going for a while. So points for the stage. In the musicals, they went all George Orwell's 1984 and gave Mrs. Trunchbull cameras to keep track of the children. For the stage adaptation, I like the visual of the screens in Mrs. Trunchbull's office. The movie musical leaned a bit too much into it for me. It gets used during multiple scenes, school song, hammer. On paper, I understand the idea. It comes across more controlling, menacing, but in the actual film, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I think it just stood out too much visually. I don't know, I think I prefer the no camera approach, so point for the OG. When Miss Honey approaches Trunchbull about putting Matilda in a higher grade, in the original film, Trunchbull accuses her of wanting to pie off Matilda to one of the other teachers. In the musicals, Trunchbull doesn't assume Miss Honey's request means she can't handle her, but takes it as an attempt to break the rules. A big no-no in her book. And then she starts singing the hammer. I definitely prefer the OG film here. The fact that Trunchbull immediately assumes the worst in Miss Honey says a lot about their relationship. Whereas the whole rules can't be broken approach by the musicals kind of just reiterates what we already know. Let's be honest, it's mainly there just to set up the song, so point goes to the OG. In the movie musical, one of Matilda's peers asks her if her big brains can do telekenipsis, and then tries to move his can of fizzy with his mind. Love me some foreshadowing, so point for the movie musical. The 1996 film has a great scene where Miss Honey comes to Casa Wormwood to discuss Matilda's brilliance. The stage adaptation turned this scene into the song Loud. In the film, Mr. Wormwood tries to pie her off multiple times, but she perseveres, showing that even though she's calm and collected, she stands up for what she thinks is right. But we didn't see that side to her in her previous scene with Trunchbull, hinting yet again at their deep-rooted, complicated relationship. I like that Miss Honey has a bit more oomph in this version, so definitely point for the film. In the musicals, they've added a whole scene where Nigel needs to hide from Trunchbull for supposedly putting a can of treacle on her chair. Matilda thinks fast and covers for him by telling Trunchbull he has narcolepsy. I tried to look up whether this scene is part of the book, but the World Wide Web wasn't wide enough for this specific question, so if you know the answer, please let me know down below. Whether or not it is part of the original source material, this scene is very exciting due to its power play. Matilda shows true courage by standing up to Trunchbull, and Trunchbull one-ups her by swinging Amanda Thripp'ed over the fence. I like that the Thripp'ed throw is a response to Matilda's wit, showing Trunchbull's immaturity. Points for the musicals. In the musicals, they included a little moment where Miss Honey apologizes to Matilda for not being able to make others see her abilities, but offers to bring in challenging books and help her as much as possible. Matilda responds with the biggest hug ever, and I start crying. The oh so recognizable need for someone to acknowledge you. Guess it's clear why I became an actor. Ooh. Besides Matilda and Miss Honey's connection growing stronger, this moment also serves as a turning point for Miss Honey in the stage musical. Right after this, she has the courage to stand up to Miss Trunchbull when she accuses Matilda of eating her chocolate cake. Ugh, I love it when a scene accomplishes multiple things. A point for the stage. Speaking of chocolate cake, in the stage adaptation, Trunchbull accuses Matilda first of eating her chocolate cake, but Matilda does not get this accusation flung at her head in the original film. Having Trunchbull accuse Matilda first is another sign of Trunchbull's tit-for-tat attitude. Point for the musicals because I like that it highlights Trunchbull's prejudice against Matilda. On to Matilda discovering her magical powers. In the original film, she quite early on makes the TV explode, and then we don't speak of her magic abilities for a long time. In the stage musical, they skip this moment and she develops them to push the Newt on Miss Trunchbull, which is the second magical incident in the original film. In the movie musical, Matilda's first magical encounter happens after Trunchbull forces Bruce into the chokey and she makes the doors move. For the arc of the story, I agree with the movie musical that the discovery of her powers should happen roughly at the halfway point. And by excluding the television explosion in the musicals, they also changed the cause of her developing these powers. In the film, her family pushes her to this point. At first with the TV, and then later on Matilda even asks her dad to yell at her because she sensed that it helps her control her powers. In the musical, it is Miss Trunchbull's behavior that triggers the powers. Well, it is injustice, which Trunchbull embodies. I'm gonna give the point to the movie musical because I like how her magical abilities grow slowly in response to what's happening to her. Another character that rears its little head earlier in the 2022 film than in the other versions is Newt. No, not Scamander. Isaac. Lavender carries him with her on her and Matilda's first day of school. In the original film, she finds him when the kids are playing in the woods. In the stage adaptation, she finds him on the way to getting Miss Trunchbull a jug of water, I think. I've watched multiple Lavenders their Newt monologue, and honestly it's really hard to figure out what they're saying in that screechy delivery. I like that the Newt is kind of a lucky charm for Lavender in the 2022 film. It makes her a bit more quirky, so point for the movie musical. In the original film, Mr. Wormwood sells a car to Trunchbull. When that car obviously breaks down, Trunchbull takes it out on Matilda by putting her in the chokey. This comes back later when Trunchbull's car breaks down, which forces her to return home when Matilda and Miss Honey are in her house. It's all tied together. Very clever story writing. Point for the OG. The iconic Mrs. D, Mrs. I, Mrs. F, F, I poem gets changed into the uprise of the kids in the musicals, where they purposefully spell words wrong. I like the wink to the original film, but I do miss the "Why are all these women married?" comment, because it is hilarious, but also maybe it shows that Trunchbull is a bit ashamed that she's not married. Point for the film. The iconic swings in When I Grow Up get swapped out for various vehicles in the musical movie, which I really hated, if I'm honest. Yes, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about the music, but this is the exception to the rule, okay?
An exception.
Besides being a little throwback to this moment in the film, the swings evoke something so nostalgic and therefore are the perfect embodiment of the song When I Grow Up. I get it, they had endless options now because of movie magic, but for me they completely missed the point. They leaned too much into the fun, imaginative side, probably to make the contrast bigger with Miss Honey's verse, but I feel like in doing so the song loses this simple sort of innocence. Something which I think a lot of adults yearn for. So point for the stage. Right, a lot happens in the musicals. We get a whole chunk of the Escapologist saga, the smell of rebellion, quiet. None of this obviously happens in the OG. But then when Matilda tries to show Miss Honey her telekinesis, she actually manages to move the cup in the musicals. In the 1996 film, Matilda tries but doesn't succeed to move the cup in that moment. This is simply because these moments happen at very different parts of the story. In the musical, this moment takes place quite late, so there's not a lot of time left to dilly-dally. Matilda has powers and she's going to use them. Whereas in the original film, they save Miss Honey finding out about Matilda's powers for when Trunchbull wants to take over Honey's class. So actually around the same beat in the story, I'd say. I feel like the placement of this moment, and therefore whether or not the cup moves, is just a consequence of highlighting different themes across the versions. Neither choice is really better or worse, so no points. In the original film, Matilda and Miss Honey Boo Boo Child actually go into Trunchbull's house to retrieve Honey's childhood treasures. But because Trunchbull's car breaks down, thanks Dad, she turns around and notices someone is in her house. Then follows a whole chase scene, but luckily Matilda and Honey manage to sneak out unscathed. This is the moment that Matilda decides to teach Trunchbull a lesson. In the musicals, Matilda makes this decision once she connects the dots that Miss Honey is in fact the daughter of the Escapologist. For me, having Trunchbull being haunted in her own house is the stronger choice. It makes her descent into madness more believable. In the musicals, Trunchbull starts to lose it after the Newt incident, which I could have used just a bit more piling up, to be honest. So yeah, point for the film. How this scene got cut from the musicals is beyond me. It exudes so much fun. I feel like Matilda only uses her powers for revenge in the musicals. I like that she also has a moment to just be a kid with magical powers. I guess maybe it got cut due to the limitations of live theater, but have you seen The Cursed Child? They can do a lot these days. The movie musical at least could have included something like this, so yeah, point for the OG. In the movie musical, Mr. Wormwood already announces that they're fleeing the country before the final Trunchbull face-off. Giving the audience this information ahead of time allows for a smoother transition out of the banishment of Trunchbull. Both in the original film and the stage musical, the Wormwoods fleeing feels like this clunky extra scene we just needed to tie up some loose ends. So definitely prefer the movie musical's approach. In the movie musical, Matilda blows up the chokey, which is the final straw for the Trunchbull. She then reveals she has a chokey for each individual student, leading to the chalk message on the board. And then the movie musical goes a bit mental. I fully agree that the chalk message isn't enough to drive Trunchbull away, which is what happens in the stage musical. But instead of the more whimsical tricks Matilda plays on her in the original film, the movie musical has her build a giant out of chains, which feels a bit random, to be honest. Not the giant, I get the symbolism, but the chains. Luckily, they then give Trunchbull a taste of her own medicine by swinging her around by her pigtails and launching her away. As the final step in Honey's journey, she takes Trunchbull's keys and announces that the school is hers now. I think this is a very important moment for Miss Honey's journey, so I like that they included it. All in all, I think the point goes to the movie musical. The stage adaptation adds a whole scene where the Russian catch the Wormwoods and Matilda talks them out of it in Russian. Apparently the Russians recently got changed to Bulgarians due to the conflict in Ukraine, so that is good. But also, thank God they just cut the whole scene out of the movie musical, because honestly, it is just so unnecessary. Between the more logistical approach of the original film, where Matilda all of a sudden announces she's been carrying adoption papers around with her for the past couple of years, and the more emotional goodbye scene in the movie musical, where it feels like Matilda and her father make amends, I definitely prefer the movie musical's version, even though I'm not the biggest fan of the new song Holding My Hand, but I'm not allowed to talk about the music, so there you go. Point for the movie musical. What's that? Have we reached the end of our story? Is that happily ever after knocking on our door? That can only mean one thing. Time to add up the points! It was a close call, but in third place we have the original film with 9 points. So that means that the crown is for a musical, but which one? In first place, the winner of the Matildas is the movie musical with 12 points! Congratulations. Now, I am aware that this is the third time in a row that a musical wins, but I swear I'm not being biased. I think it has more to do with the fact that the musical is always the latest version, because obviously it's such an advantage to see what works and what doesn't, and then just build on that. I guess next time I'll just have to compare a musical to its non-musical film adaptation, which I don't think exists. Anyway, I hope that you like my meticulous Matilda comparison, and if you like what you see, subscribe. If you don't like what you see, subscribe. If you need to eat food to stay alive, subscribe. And if you support Trump, fuck off.